You're listening to Cherishing Scripture Podcast, a podcast that's changing society by cherishing Scripture.
Why do you need to carry an amulet around in your pocket that says WWJD to remind you what Jesus would do? Isn't that the Holy Spirit's job?
But it seems like a lot of men are trying to manufacture this difference as opposed to letting it naturally happen.
Exactly.
And the
Exactly
Bible,
right.
the Bible naturally changes people and makes them different.
In debates, when you get in a debate with someone, you know that you've won the debate when they turn personal.
Yeah, they're attacking these preachers that are standing for their liberty. And
Right.
when they can't find anything biblically wrong with this person, they start picking out other things.
Yep. And if you don't think that those two things can overpower and overtake you, you're pretending.
Right.
And now here's your hosts, Pastor Brad Bailey, Adam Capps, Zach Taylor, and Jeremy Boggs.
Welcome back to another episode of Cherishing Scripture Podcast. Today, I'm joined here with Pastor Bailey all the way at the end. Seems like he's getting further and further away from me. I got Adam Capps, and squished in between, we have Edward here with us. And
First time
with us, guesting today. And then we got Zachary Taylor behind the sound booth. As Pastor Bailey says, not the famous Zachary Taylor, but the Zachary Taylor.
Yeah. Right.
So, man, are you guys full?
Yes.
Full? I didn't think we were going to
Dinner on the ground, man. Baptist food is the food, man. I'm telling you.
Dude, I'm telling you, I don't even know if we're going to be able to make it to these podcasts because I'm so full. This is like my nap food. You know, as soon as you get done eating Thanksgiving food, you go right to sleep. So if we start slurring, that's a different thing. But anyways, last week we talked about Pastor Bailey's book here, Toxic Traditions. We talked about how you can tell if things are getting out of hand with your pastor or an inordinate pastoral authority. Got some really good responses. The one that I can think of off the top of my head, a guy, one of our someone we know here, commented on there, and I'd like to see what you guys think and kind of comment on it. But he said that the church that he was at previously, if you wanted financial help or you asked for financial help, the pastor had to go into your home. He wanted to see what was in your fridge. He wanted to see if you had cable, and he wanted to see what you were reading and what your diet was like in order for them to provide financial help to you.
Seems like a great opportunity, to be honest with you.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, because think about it, man. What if you just had random objects in your fridge? You know, he comes in there, and then he's going to start really wondering, like, man, he's filling up his fridge with stuff. He really needs food.
Yeah.
He's going to see what you're reading. You can put anything in your bookshelf, man. You can put anything in there. There's a lot of weird books out there. So it seems like a great opportunity.
Well, and it perfectly described what we were talking about last week, that veto power of a pastor.
Yeah.
He said that they actually left because of it, but that his dad had stayed behind, and they demanded him to bring his wife back to church and to get them there. But it's just crazy how, you know, where do we draw that line? What gave these pastors these ideas to say, I want to know what's in your fridge before I help you? And I get if you're spending money foolishly, but still, does that mean that still, to me, that doesn't still give the pastor the right to come into my home and tell me what's in my fridge?
Well, I think that's a difficult one. I think the way that probably started was that their intentions weren't necessarily corrupt. It was probably, more of it's a bad thinking. I will say that, but it's more of the thinking of, well, if you got alcohol in your fridge, then you don't need the church's help.
Right.
I think is kind of checking that, which, like I said, doesn't necessarily give him the right to go in the house. And then the cable thing is, I know personally, one thing that a lot of people will do is they'll say, man, I'm struggling and I just can't make it. But then they have all these extra, things that are nice to have and not making the payments that they need to make.
Yeah.
So now, do I think that the pastor should necessarily walk into the house and inspect the whole thing? Mm-hmm. No, but I could see how it possibly started out right, but could easily get off track.
Yeah. I can see good, I guess, somewhat good intentions, but then when you start wanting to find out what I'm reading, which is
that's kind of weird. I mean,
comments.
I think it goes that. My thought on that is kind of what Adam said. If you know that that's the case, then if I was to ever ask the pastor for help, I would just like pack my pantry full of ramen noodles and a bunch of Vienna sausages and only rice and beans.
So you're telling me that that's not what's in your pantry right now?
Actually, I have barely anything in my pantry because it's sports season, so we don't get the luxury of being at home really. Yeah. So, but no, I would do that. I would, rip the cable box out and hide it. I would
put my family Bible out
just
on
the
coffee
Bible
table.
on the bookshelf. Yeah, and it's like you could easily, rig the system, I guess you could say. But I don't know. I think that there needs to be steps to helping people that truly need help, because I know that there's been instances, and we won't get into too much detail, but there has been instances since I've been here of people that need help from the church, and then it gets to the point where the only time they come in is because they need their electric bill paid. And then that they're smoking cigarettes or drinking beer, and then it's like, but they need the church's help to pay their electric bill, and they make you feel bad because sometimes they'll have kids or children or whatever the case may be. So I think that should that pastor do that? No, but I think that that is a reach. What he's doing is definitely a reach for sure. But I think that it's a reach because so many people have done the wrong thing. Would I, as a pastor, do that? Never. Do I think it's very odd for a pastor to do that? Of course.
Yeah.
But like I said,
and I would guess that man probably has a very small church,
right?
Because when you're trying to manage people's lives that closely, you're not going to be able to maintain any sizable congregation in that kind of a setting. But I do remember one time when I was preaching in North Carolina in a meeting, and we, as guest preachers in this particular meeting, they told us that we had to be willing for the host pastor to come to all of our motel rooms unannounced, so that he could, see if there was someone in there that wasn't supposed to be in there, see if we're watching television, see if we'd brought any kind of clothes that we weren't supposed to be wearing in the meeting, and so on and so forth. And so, yeah, I mean, I've seen this stuff, and one of the things that people have kind of cast in our face, or especially me, is they say, well, I've never heard of anything like that happening. And, the thing is they just haven't been where I've been and seen some of the things that I've seen. I've seen some pretty radical authority. I mean, some really, really radical authority in my life before. And it's, again, most of the time, men who have very small churches, and their authority is being exercised, but it is being exercised at the cost and at the expense of growing that church.
Right.
Because if it gets too big, it gets out of hand.
Yeah, and I think just to once again clarify, my dad's a pastor of a very small church, and he doesn't do that. I think to take that reach of pastoral authority is a stretch, to say the least, for a pastor to do that personally.
Yeah. I think the problem is that pastors stopped becoming charitable and became investors. So the issue is they're making sure that their investment is coming forth. So they're going to check on this investment, right? So the reality is when I give money to the church, if I tithe, I'm giving that to God. Now I can give it to a church, and if the pastor decides to blow it on whatever, I still was obedient to God and gave that money, that tithe. Right. Now he's going to be held accountable for what he does with the tithe I've given him. Same thing. A lot of pastors check on their investments, right? They're like, well, is this a good investment? And the thing is the church called to help the poor? Yes. Yeah. They're called to help the poor. And the problem is a lot of pastors have become investors instead of being charitable. And so they're just more concerned about the skin off, if it looks good for their church, because they don't want a case where they gave money to someone and it was used for wrong things. But at the end of the day, you can only do so much. I mean, you can't give money blindly. But if a pastor says, okay, I prayed about it, I believe that, I need to help this person, and if that person decides to just blow it on something dumb, well, that's accountable to that person.
Yeah, exactly.
And I would add to that, I think it's an excellent point, Edward, and I would just add to that too. I was taught and trained by Dr. Ballou that when you give an offering to someone, that offering loses your identity. For example, you're talking about tithing to the church and so on and so forth. There was, some time ago, there was a rash of lawsuits against churches, people wanting their money back, wanting their tithe, wanting their offerings back. And churches all over the land were winning these cases because, once you donate that money to a cause, that money loses your identity. You know, it's no longer your money. It's the Lord's money. It's the church's money, or however you want to look at that. And I feel sort of the same way, you know, if we're giving to someone who is in need. Our church, traditionally, what we have done is we don't give cash because cash could be used. I mean, it could be used for street drugs. You know, there's a lot of things that people could do with cash, but we give on most occasions like gift cards, and we try to get gift cards, for example, to like Save a Lot, which is an establishment that doesn't sell alcohol and tobacco at all. It's just groceries. So we have done that on occasion. There's been other occasions where, you know, if people needed gasoline, we take them to the gas pump and actually get it, you know, that way, so that we know that they're not. But, you know, the fact is, it goes back. If I were giving a Bible verse for this, it would be the James passage where he talks about pure religion and undefiled. You know, the word you used, Edward, was investment. A lot of pastors see this as an investment, but pure religion forbids that mentality of it being an investment. You know, it's pure religion is to visit the widow and the orphan. And the reason that's pure religion is because there's nothing coming back. You know, you give that to a widow, you're not getting anything back for it. You know, we have ladies here in our church that are widows, and when we do special things for them, we do it knowing that there will be no return on this. We know that there will be, you know, there'll be a bigger need or a different need next time. Same thing with orphans. You know, you're not getting anything back. They're not going to be pillars of the church. They're not going to be big givers. They're not going to be business people, so on and so forth. And so, you know, this pastor going to these people's homes, I doubt that his pure religion is intact. I doubt he has that real testimony.
Yeah, it says in James 1:27, pure religion and undefiled before God and the Father is this, to visit the fatherless and widows in their affliction, and to keep himself unspotted from the world.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, so I think that goes back to what y'all were saying. And Edward, I think you made a good point, because when you're talking about pastors, in the legal sense, you're considered the CEO, but I think they've taken that to a literal sense as well, that they are actually the CEO of this. And that goes back to our episode last week with veto power. I mean, when you are a CEO or you're the boss and you're not the shepherd, it's a little bit of a different situation on how you run it. And when you start treating people like, you know, figures or potential returns or workers, then it becomes major issues than if you're seeing them as sheep and you're the shepherd.
Yeah, and I'll add this, and then we'll get to that new point of today, which kind of leads along the lines of this money talk. But you know, even Jesus, though, when he gave or when he healed somebody, correct me if I'm wrong, but not everybody became a believer that he healed.
No, that's correct.
Remember when those blind men that he healed, those blind men, and he healed one of them, and the guy walked away and said, "I don't even know who did this."
Right.
So,
and then also you have the 10 lepers. Only one of them returned.
Yeah. Okay, that was probably what I'm thinking.
So
of.
The blind man thing was another illustration of it. But the 10 lepers, I actually heard a sermon title one time that was called "10 Men Healed, 1 Man Saved."
Yeah. So, I mean, even people, it's kind of like what you were saying, Edward. It ultimately what that person does afterwards will fall on them. I think there are precautions you can take, like what we do. We don't give cash, or if we see this a repeatable offense, or not. I don't know if offense is the right word. Sorry, but like, there's just ways of looking at it and seeing, okay, well, is this being abused, or is this a real situation?
Yeah, I've seen it on school days when a person will come up and they'll do it, and he's actually told me to say it as well now. But if he sees them, he'll say, "Hey, if you come to service on Sunday, then I'd love to help you out."
That makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah.
Yeah, that worked. Yeah,
that's been our policy. If we do any substantial help to someone, when I say substantial, I mean if we're paying a $200 light bill, or helping them with some kind of a need like that, if we tell them, okay, you come to church, and then we'll make out a check to Tico, or we'll make out a check to whoever, and we take care of it for them that way. But I understand this pastor's motivation to make sure that the church's funds and the church's resources not being used to buy nicotine and alcohol and drugs and whatever, or pay an iPhone bill or take care of luxuries. I get that, the problem is this, going back to our original topic here, this is a pastoral authority thing where, once again, there is a mentality there where they feel like they have the right to be involved inside the four walls of someone's home. They have this authority. And any one of you men that are sitting here at this table, you if I tried to come into your home and say, look, I'm changing your diet, or I'm changing your your activities and so on in this home, man, you'd boot me out on my ear, because that I don't have that kind of authority.
Right.
But
It's true.
there are some men, sadly, who do have that kind of authority.
Well, and I've talked about that with someone, I said, like, that's the big thing is, like, when you are around your pastor, you should handle yourself the same way you would if you were by yourself. If pastor said, hey, I want to come into your house, I mean, he can come into my house. He can see every room he wants. I don't have anything to hide. If he sees something he may not necessarily agree with, if it's not sin to me, then, I mean, I may have it. He may not like it in his house, but I may have it.
Not to drag this comment on any further, but we're having some good information here. But this idea of not having anything to hide, well, that isn't necessarily only going to be a problem with you, though, Zach, is it? It could be either a problem with you or a problem with the pastor. Because in this instance, him going in and checking what the man has in his house to read and what he has in his fridge and that sort of thing, well, that's not a problem with what he's eating or what he's doing. It's a problem with the pastoral's overreach.
Yeah,
Pastor's
exactly.
overreach.
Right.
So that's, to use me as an example, if pastor came into my house and I said, hey, I really need help, or if he was just coming to my house to spray, right? He does pest control, and he comes in and he sees my computer and he's like, I think that playing video games is a major waste of time. He'd be like, okay, thank you for letting me know that. Right? That's about what it would be. I would be like, okay, I appreciate you giving me your opinion, but at the end of the day, if he was able to prove to me that it was a sin, or if I was misusing it in a way, then that's one thing. But for him to say, hey, you have a video game and I think video games are stupid, then I'm going to be like, awesome.
Yeah, and for us, we know that that's not something our pastor would ever do. But
there is real
so
situations
many
like that.
people have pastor that would do that exact thing, go right into their house and say, yeah, it's wrong for you to be playing video games. It's wrong for you to be watching TV. It's wrong for you to be watching football. I know a lot of pastors that believe that sort of thing. Yeah. And so, like, while it's a little bit alien to us, this happens to a lot of people.
Yeah, it really does.
Well, let me ask you guys a question. So, if you guys invested half of your salary into something, wouldn't you guys check up on it?
Yeah.
You would watch it. Like, I invest money and I watch it consistently all the time, as much as I can. Whenever I have free time, I'm watching it. And if something goes sour, I change it for something else, or I change its direction, or I sell this, buy that, trade. And the thing is, that's that mentality, right? Because if I give something like charity, right? Like if I'm giving you money and I'm not investing, it's out of my mind. I'm not looking at it, right? And that's the part of trusting God, right? You give somebody something, and then the problem is when you're investing into somebody, and this is why normally in a pastoral authority is tied in with anger, because if my investments go bad, it makes me upset.
Sure.
It's because I take it personal. And that ties into a whole different subject there.
Yeah. We really got to get to this next point, though. So a lot of juicy stuff. And it's okay if this one goes a little long, because this next point is I would say, an incredibly major issue. So we're talking about an inordinate pastoral authority, how it's out of hand. It says, when a pastor refuses to offer a full disclosure of the church's financial standings, he has crossed the line into inordinate pastor authority.
Yeah.
So,
well,
major one.
Yeah.
Big problem.
I think that's that's a major red flag there. Pastors talked to me before when we started dealing with the online, like, financial upkeeping, reconciling, and stuff like that. And he told me, I asked him, like, hey, what do you want me to do if someone comes up and says they want to see, like, the financial status? And he said, basically send them to him, and if it's a church member in good standing, then he has no problem with it. I think any pastor should honestly have no problem with you looking at the financial statement and giving an answer, because at the end of the day, if they're a church member in good standing, I believe that they do have
I absolutely agree. A right.
A right to look at it.
I totally agree with that.
And I know I can speak for Pastor Bailey. He has nothing to hide. He has nothing that he's worried about people seeing. But there are pastors that have things you worry about. You go and you spend. How do you explain if you go and spend a couple $1,000s going out and doing an activity, right?
Well, even pastors that don't have anything to worry about, but still are not going to allow regular members to view the finances. Well, that could, instead of being an issue of being greedy of filthy lucre, it's then an issue of pride, right? Well, you're just a lowly
it's an
layman.
authority thing.
I am the pastor, and I'm the one who runs this joint. A layman is not going to question me and my finances. So, it may not even only be for pastors that are greedy, filthy lucre, and that that are spending money unwisely. It could just be pastors that are just prideful.
Yeah.
See, what the mistake is that it's not their money, though.
That's right.
It's God's right.
That's right.
It's God's money, and
so,
the thing about the accountability that we should be able to justify everything biblically.
Right.
If we're coming up with accountability policies and things of that nature. So you look at the Apostle Paul, who was consistently talking about receiving and sending offerings and so on and so forth. He talked about grace. That's another word for offerings. He talked about dispensations, which is the dispensing of offerings in that context. And he talked about communication. Now concerning some of the things whereof you communicated, or I appreciate your communication. He said that to the church at Thessalonica and several others. But if you look at his handling of those things, the Apostle Paul was careful to place those offerings in the hands of certain individuals with a sealed letter that disclosed that this individual was bearing an offering. They are carrying an offering to Thessalonica, or they're carrying an offering to Jerusalem, so on and so forth. And he always certified that in his letter, which kept him as a model of accountability. Even the Apostle Paul, who, if there's anyone who has authority, it's him.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And if there's anybody who says, hey, God told me to do this with the money, it would have been the Apostle Paul. But you notice that he sent it with responsible treasurers, and he always certified that an offering was being carried by that individual in the sealed letter, so that when the letter arrived, the church would say, okay, where is the offering that he sent with you by the courier? And so there are accountability concepts that are taught even in the New Testament. They're simple. They're not complex. Our accountability today has to be far more diverse and complex because of the nature of currency today. Back in those days, you could send an offering of garments. You could send an offering of grain. You could send
goods.
Usable, spendable goods, or it could be an offering of gold. There were three different types of currency: gold, grain, and garments back in those days. And so their offerings back then were a lot more vulnerable. But our offerings today are very complex. When you give to Brandon Baptist Tabernacle, you could be given to the missions program, you could be given to the general fund, you could be given to a building program, some special project. Several things that you can do. And so our online accountability is always present and accounted for there. But, my concern is, again, it goes back to an authority issue. I think, Adam, is what you were talking about. And my concern is when a man says, it's none of your business.
Yeah.
You just make a simple inquiry, and he says it's none of your business.
This kind of goes back to, like we said earlier, this is the opposite of nothing to hide. Usually when the guys don't want you to know what the finances are, they have something to hide about it.
Yeah.
I did a little bit further.
And when you have nothing to hide, you hide nothing.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was about to say.
I looked at that guy. Remember that guy we talked about last Bible college semester about David Taylor? Yeah. If you actually look how that guy dresses, we talked about it in Bible college, but to see this guy, I'm telling you, he dresses like a prince.
Yeah.
He's got one photo that he looks like that prince from Cinderella.
Yeah.
That's exactly the clothes he wore. It looked just like that outfit.
I'm gonna be honest. Yeah. I don't even know what the prince from Cinderella looked like, Jeremy.
He lies. You watch that movie every week, bro.
But
what are you talking about?
It's still a bad problem because you got pastors that are taking millions of dollars.
Well, and here's the thing.
I don't think we've ever said this on our podcast, but that happened to this church.
It did.
Yeah.
And
we had a more than $1 million embezzlement that took place here in this ministry, and it was devastating to the ministry.
Every time,
sometimes even still, we're dealing with it.
Every time people come and they're like, "Man, y'all have such a great property," I'm like, "Yeah, I know, it's great, isn't it?" And I go, "Hey, by the way, go look at these 4 nice houses right behind the church. We actually used to own those, but then they got sold and we got none of the money for it. So
Last time,
there's that too.
I was riding with you, Pastor, and you showed me the other houses, that whole around that corner of that church.
Yeah, when we had to do a forensic audit of this ministry, and when the man that did the forensic audit audited the ministry, he said this is more like auditing a real estate company than it is a ministry. He said there's so many properties in the history of this church that
So outrageous.
Yeah.
Well,
here's the bad thing is a lot of these pastors, because of that CEO thing, they assume ownership. And this is a good lesson not only for talking about pastors but even for us. There is a big difference between ownership and stewardship.
Absolutely.
And a lot of people have forgotten what
it's
that
night
word,
and day the difference between those two
difference.
things.
And people have forgotten what stewardship means. So God is the owner. Christ is the head of the church. God owns everything that this church has. Stewardship, we're just managing it. That's it. It's like at my job,
including
I manage the firearms department, but I do not own it.
Right.
That ultimately goes owned by the owner of the store.
Whenever that word steward is used, it reminds me of the third Lord of the Rings movie.
Oh, yeah.
I think his name was Denethor or something like that, whatever. He was the steward of Gondor, right? And there was like an actual
nerd.
Oh, stop, man. You're so much more of a nerd than I am.
Yeah.
Okay, anyway, there's an actual shot of him in a throne room where he has a smaller throne right next to the king's throne, right? A smaller throne symbolizing that he's not actually in control of the kingdom. He's just sort of running it while the king's not there. But then there was a scene in which he says, knowingly, that Aragorn is the rightful king of Gondor, says, I am not going to recognize him as king. And this is sort of... I'm getting somewhere with it, all right? Allow my nerdiness to play out, all right? The point is that it's often the case for stewards that they consider themselves to be in a higher place of authority than the person who actually is. Mm-hmm. They naturally get like that because they have whatever that is that they're being a steward over. They believe that they own that thing after a while. And that was beautifully illustrated in that movie that apparently I'm the only one who saw.
Yeah, I've never seen the movie, but but you're exactly right.
No, I've seen the movie, but I never thought someone would, so wonderfully illustrate it for us.
And I can tell you, some of the temptations. Every pastor is tempted in some way or another financially. Right. It is so easy to take advantage of a ministry's funds. It is so absolutely easy. And we have layers and layers and layers of accountability here in our church. But if I was a bad guy, I could do it. There are loopholes. There are ways to excuse it. There are ways to, to do it and explain it away. For example, if, I've been having a few health issues here and there. So let's just say if I justified in my mind saying, well, this church needs a pastor. This church needs me to be healthy. So that justifies me using the church's money to get a gym membership. Or that justifies me using the church's money to pay for X, Y, or Z. This happens all the time. I've seen pastors who have used church money to make vehicle repairs. I've seen them use church money to, and here's what they say: if I don't have a car, I can't make it to church. If I can't make it to church, I can't be their pastor. And so I've seen those types of things happen on many, many, many occasions. And I got to tell you, I just came out of a battle. I mean, a long and detailed battle about a pastor who was, basically borrowing money from people in the congregation. A pastor who was basically, taking money and lying about what he was doing with it, and that is unjust. But the way that gets justified in a pastor's mind is they say, if I can't be in that pulpit Sunday after Sunday after Sunday and be dressed appropriately, so that means the church has to buy my clothes if I don't have the money. If I can't transport myself there appropriately, that means I ought to have a nice car. If I can't do, and so they start laying out all of these expenses and saying these are the church's responsibility. Now, if the church decides that's their responsibility. We're talking about a different scenario altogether.
And I was
But
actually
if that pastor is making those decisions on his own about doing that, that would be why he would be hesitant to give a full financial disclosure, because he knows that there are things that he's been doing with the church's money that are unjust.
See, and that was something you brought up, David Taylor, so I'm going to reference him in a second. But you mentioned the gym membership or the car and stuff, and I think that if a pastor really needed those, and it depends, I guess, on the financial situation, if he's paid, if he is a actual paid, or if he's bivocational, whatever the case may be. But oftentimes, from what I've realized about it, is in those situations, they don't go and bring it to the deacons or to the church.
Right.
They just kind of make the decision. But then also there's a very irresponsible way, right? Instead of getting a cheap $10 a month membership, they go and get a membership at Lifetime Fitness,
Right.
which is like $100 a month.
Yeah.
Instead of going out and getting a $2,000 used car, they go out and buy a $60,000-$70,000
Right.
Mercedes
Right.
Benz. Or
and by the way, let's get a membership for my wife also.
yeah, exactly.
Let's get a membership for our secretary who's having
I'll
some
take one.
quote unquote health issues, or let's get a membership.
Yeah, exactly.
For all the,
And
we want to make sure we've got good energy on the podcast, so let's make sure everybody gets a gym membership
I don't
for the
know,
podcast.
guys. To be
members.
honest, it seems like it doesn't matter what amount of money. If it's being used dishonestly, the amount is not what I'm concerned with. Obviously the amount accounts for something, because people are concerned with that, and it causes debt. But
Right.
in my mind, when I'm talking about from a biblical, spiritual matter, it being used dishonestly is that the height of
right,
issue.
and that's
I'm not
why I
gonna
said
say-
bringing it, like in David Taylor's instance, he was bringing it to people, the people that mattered, that made the decisions in the church, even though he just had a bunch of yes men. But he was going out and he needed a place for guests to stay. But instead of buying or instead of making renovations like having a prophet chamber, he went and bought a $3 million house for his family. And when
Like a
he needed
resort.
vehicles,
Was
he
huge.
needed vehicles. So what he did, instead of getting a cheap vehicle after he got the approval, he went out and bought a Mercedes and then got it turned into a limo. And it's like a lot of these people that are making these financial decisions, even if they get the approval, sometimes they're just so, I guess, irresponsible.
Well, Creflo Dollar, Jesse Duplantis, and Kenneth Copeland, we were talking about him earlier today. Creflo Dollar, Jesse Duplantis, and Kenneth Copeland have all boasted about owning $1.5 million, $2 million, $3 million, $5 million jets, private jets, so that they can traverse back and forth over the country doing the Lord's work.
Because there's demons on regular planes. That's
Right.
what he said.
Yeah, that's what exactly. He said, "Yeah, I can't fly commercial or with these people because there's all these demon possessed people on the planes." But the way the real cover up here is that these airplanes are purchased in ministry names because that gives them tax exemption.
Right.
And this is one of the things I pointed out recently at Tampa Theological Institute, is that we had that financial class, and we were dealing with some of the issues, or that church conflict resolution class, and we were dealing with some of the issues that cause conflicts in church, and the financial thing is a major problem. And I pointed out that you need to our students there, I said, you need to pay attention to how many vehicles in the state of Florida have what we call X tags, which is a tag that begins with the letter X. Its first digit is the letter X. That's a tax-exempt tag. And people don't know this, but when you have that kind of tag, you get this incredible rate. And so I pointed that out to our people. I said, now that you're riding around Hillsborough County, start looking for vehicles that have those kinds of X tags. And they started coming back to class and saying, "Pastor, I saw a Cadillac Escalade 2021 with an X tag on it the other day." Or they're saying, "I saw a Range Rover 2021 with an X tag on it." And basically what that is, that's a pastor who has, or some nonprofit president or nonprofit employee who has registered that as a not-for-profit vehicle. And the state, that's the loophole in the state of Florida, is when you register that vehicle not-for-profit, like we did this Freightliner bus out here, okay, they don't ask me, what are you going to be using it for? They just say, okay, do you have verification that this is a not-for-profit ministry? So I could do that with my wife's Honda. I could do that with my pickup. I could do that with my son's Ford. You could register these things and have an incredible tax break. Thousands and thousands of dollars are being channeled through that ministry. And so there's 1,000 different ways to do this, and these are the creative things that pastors do that prevents them from being able to be entirely transparent when it comes to financial disclosure. They don't want to do it because they know that they have been hiding various things, and they don't want the church to find out about it.
Yeah. Here's another thing.
Happens
Something
all the time.
I have seen that I think is also a problem is the type of people that they put in place to manage money for the church. I think also comes into a type, like I know of one where so the pastor didn't have to be the one. His wife was the treasurer.
Yeah.
Which I find incredibly dangerous.
Oh, it is anathema. Yeah. We don't do that here at our church. I have the ability to sign checks in this ministry. If I sign a check, if there's some reason, and this is rare, very, very rare, for me to have to do something like this, but let's just say if a missionary comes here on Thursday and there's no one here and we want to give that missionary an offering, I have to call the treasurer. If I write a check, sign the check, give it to the missionary as an offering, then I send a picture of the check to that person. And we've always done it or to that treasurer, and we've always done it that way because it is not wise for pastors to be signers on accounts. It just is not wise. It's not wise for their wives to be signers on accounts.
Makes sense. Staying above reproach.
Yeah. And she was even, Pastor, you do this thing. I'm curious to see, what if you know if other pastors do the same, but you actually don't know what people tithe.
No, right? I don't.
But
and that's intentional.
Man,
that's intentional. I don't want to know what people tithe.
And
I just know if they do or if they don't, if they're going into a position.
Yeah.
So for example, if someone wants to be a Sunday school teacher, I just go to our treasurer and say, I don't want to know the amount. I just want to know yes or no, do they tithe?
That was the other problem I had with a pastor's wife being a treasurer, was knowing who tithes what. I mean, I guess it's not obviously the treasurers do know, but I think it is dangerous for a pastor's wife to be in charge of church finances just because of who her husband is.
Yeah, and let's don't pretend about this. That will affect your preaching.
Yeah.
If you know who gives what, it will affect your preaching.
Because you're a human.
Exactly. Yeah. Because, for example, okay, let's just say here we got Edward here with us, all right, and let's just say Edward gives peanuts to the church. Okay, so he messes up and gets into some moral failure, and I'm not making any predictions here or anything, but let's just say he messes up, gets into some moral failure. I would be more apt to deal harshly with him because it's not going to, going back to the words you use, the investment of it. Yeah. If there's no investment being made, I may be more apt to deal harshly with someone who gives less. But then you may be more apt to pass over someone's disciplinary case if they're big givers. And so I don't know who gives what.
So it's turned from being greedy of filthy lucre into being a respecter of persons.
Yeah, I was just going to say that. Yeah.
Well, the thing is,
James said, if you respect persons, ye commit sin.
Yeah. Well, this stuff is what a good businessman does, right? A good business owner does. A good politician does. But really poor pastors do.
Yeah,
exactly. Right.
If you're a good businessman, you don't want to pay taxes, right? You don't want to do that. Sure. If you're a politician, you're trying to escape those things. But if you're a pastor, that makes you a very poor pastor.
That's a good point.
Makes you a wise business person, though.
Man.
Yeah. And that's why the church is not supposed to be operated like a business. I understand there are certain business principles that have to be incorporated in the church for financial purposes, but the church is not a business. It is a faith organization. It has to be operated by faith.
Man. Well, I think that's a good place to cut it off. We did a lot of discussions. I wanted to actually say I saw an article this week of a pastor who borrowed he took $10,000 from the church to pay back the debts that he owed and to take care of other personal things that he just wanted. He did it in 3 different years. They said he did it in 07, 08, and 09. and they're just finding out about all of this stuff that he did. So
and I
it's
would just
still
throw
happening
up,
today.
I would just like in 30 seconds or less, just throw up several red flags. Okay, if a man is borrowing money from the church or from church members individually, major red flag.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Major red flag. Number two, if a pastor is changing phone numbers often, if his mobile number is constantly being changed, major red flag, because he's running away from something there. Number three, if he is put on the hot seat by someone and they start asking him financial questions and want to know, why don't we have a full financial disclosure in the church, and he disciplines that person or preaches that person out, which happens all the time, right? Mm-hmm. He'll stand up there and say, we've got troublemakers in this church, and bless God, I won't tolerate it. I'm the pastor here, and so on and so forth. So he preaches that person out the back door. Major red flag. And then, if he is setting up nepotism, where his son is the treasurer, or his daughter-in-law is the treasurer, or his wife is the treasurer, things of that nature, another major red flag. I mean that's enough. But there are things that people need to watch out for when it comes to ministry fraud.
Yeah, for sure. So, again, thank you guys for joining us today on this episode of Cherishing Scripture podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, go ahead and like, comment, and subscribe. We want to hear more from you guys about this specific subject, or if there's a subject you do want us to cover in the near future, we'd love to hear that as well. If you're a Spotify listener, we just got our videos on there now. You can watch videos on Spotify. And the cool thing is a couple weeks ago we actually talked about how YouTube, you have to keep your phone open if you want to keep it playing. But the cool thing about doing it on Spotify is you can watch it and then you can turn your phone and it continues to play. So you don't have to worry about it stopping or anything like that. Yeah. So really cool feature there. You can email us at info@brandonbaptisttabernacle.com if you're not on any of those